Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on, and for most of those platforms, your comment will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I apologize for being a bit late today. We are starting to use a new platform to broadcast from, and I was planning to use that platform today, but at the last minute there were some technical issues. So I am once again using Restream, and we will see. Uh, I'm sure these were very simple technical issues to resolve. We'll see if we can perhaps do that platform tomorrow. And hello to an invisible friend. It's good to see you, invisible friend. Now, you may know that yesterday I did a best of Reverend Don's vlog, and I talked about cutting cords as a metaphysical technique. Part of a feature I did a little over a year ago called Defense Against the Dark Arts Week. But I thought that this week I would speak a little bit about different ideas on magic. And today I have scheduled image magic as something to talk about. Because image magic is one of the oldest forms of magic and still very broadly used. And I thought there would be a few things worth saying about that. Image magic goes back well before any form of written history. The famous cave paintings from various parts of the world are generally believed to have been image magic. And they are quite fascinating to look at from a modern metaphysical perspective. A number of aspects of those paintings really surprised people when they were first brought forward in the 19th century. Hello to Unique One in the chat room. One of them was the artistic skill of many of the artists of that prehistoric time period. Not all of them, but in many cases, various sorts of prehistoric animals are portrayed with extreme realism and a level of skill that was very surprising to people. In fact, there's a story with, I believe, the Lascaux caves. They were one of the first people in them was a little girl, the daughter of the man who owned the land where they were found. And if I remember the story correctly, I won't swear that I do, but if I remember it correctly, she was frightened because she didn't initially realize they were paintings. They were so realistic. She was surprised by an animal in the cave, or thought she was. And hello to Swack Fan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Swack Fan. And this is a very interesting thing to consider. That great level of realism and how it appeared, well, how it appears to us now, but how it appeared to them at the time. One of the things that has been a bit of a subject of commentary in the 1990s during the Great Witch Wars is the painting known as La Sorcière, said to be the oldest portrayal of the horned god, of which we are aware. And of course, there are now many other points of view on that. But one of the things that was very commonly said back in the 90s, and you'll remember this if you've been around for a while, early 2000s, was that the image is not as it has been portrayed, that in fact it has no horns. Therefore, it cannot be a picture of a, quote, horned god, end quote. This was a very interesting thing, and it took a little while for the truth of this issue to come out. One of the reasons is that there had not been, until around that time, any photographs of this artwork. There was only reproductions of a sketch that had been done by one of the early explorers. And when the first photography came out, there were no visible horns. Now, what has since come out Subsequently, people have been looking at these paintings not in electric light, but in firelight as they were originally meant to be seen, and they found a number of things by doing that. Regarding Les Sorcières, one of the things that has come out is that yes, there absolutely are horns. They are created by fissures in the rock. They're, it's like the painting was put there to take advantage of those fissures, which become the horns in firelight when they're created by the shadows. But if you take a photo of it with electric light, you don't get those shadows, you don't see the horns. You get a misrepresentation of how they would have seen that image. This is also true for a lot of those other images. I mentioned the little girl being frightened by the realism of the picture, and if you look at photographs with electric lights, you might wonder why that would be. But this was, I believe, in the 1870s, and they probably were using firelight. One of the things they found, looking at the ancient cave paintings with firelight, is that they were far more sophisticated than they've been given credit for. They were meant to interact with that firelight. It makes a difference to what you see. I mentioned Le Sorcière, that there were natural features that became part of the artwork because of the shadow created by the firelight. This is true for many other pieces of artwork as well. But another thing, if you look at a number of these paintings, you'll see a similar animal repeated several times in close sequence, in a way that people had once thought meant that they were just using whatever blank wall space was available without really thinking about it. But viewing this in firelight, they've found out that these effectively act as animated images. And hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nikki. That is to say, with the flickering of the firelight, it catches different versions of the artwork that have been done in this manner on the wall, and gives an illusion of movement that's apparently very realistic. This speaks to, one, people being far more sophisticated than we used to give them credit for, and also just how magical, in terms simply of observance, these images were. And Invisible Friend says, that's so cool. Yes, it really is. I would never have thought that they could animate their images in this way, but it's been pretty clearly shown now. And that is quite a fascinating thing. Now, why is all of this relevant to image magic? Well, again, it's more or less universally thought that these were done for magical purposes. That level of realism really adds to that. Of course, they don't really know why this artwork was done for magical purposes, but it's generally assumed that that was the reason. Hello to Kayleen in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kayleen. And some of the reasons for that are the subject matter and also the location, because these are not, they're not decoration in caves that people lived in. They are in places that is generally thought were being used for ritual purposes. And caves were right down into the historical period used in this way. So it's not surprising that should be the case. It's usually thought that the paintings were done to ensure success in hunting because these societies survived by hunting. And the subject of the painting is almost always different animals that they would have been hunting. Now, I would add to that could also have had shamanistic aspects in the sense of traveling from one world to another, and that they may very well have pictured the spirit world more in terms of animals than in terms of people, which certainly is still sometimes the case in shamanism. But we'll never exactly know what they used it for in an intellectual sense. Now, it is worth noting that people can get some psychic readings on these. The most famous psychic that I know of who studied the cave paintings and other images from that time period was Karl Oshowitz. He was a Polish psychic who ended up being murdered with other members of the Polish intelligentsia at the end of World War II. But during his lifetime, he did some very interesting readings on that time period, which have tended to be upheld as more information has been found. So I highly recommend learning more about Karl Oshowitz if you want to have some interesting information on what a psychic can do. I don't know of many other people who have been archaeological psychics that way, but there have been a couple. Um, Another famous, what we might call archaeological psychic, was Om Seti, um, who worked in Egyptian archaeology and believed herself to be the reincarnation um, of an Egyptian woman. She wrote a lot about that. And there are a number of other people who have done this sort of thing too. None of which speaks directly to image magic, but it's fascinating to know. Getting back to image magic works on the principle of sympathetic magic. The idea that items which are in sympathy, that is to say, they have similar qualities, can be used to stand in for one another magically. In this case, when we look at the cave paintings, the image of, let's say, um, a bison, I'm assuming I know some of them are bison, um, can stand for the bison itself. And what you do with that image, in theory, can then play out with the bison. In this case, having a successful hunt. Um, we see this very heavily in many types of magic that use a photograph or a drawing of a person to represent that person as the key to aim the magic at. Say you want to do healing for a person or you want to do protection for them, using their photo can be a way of focusing that. But so can simply writing their name or having a sigil of some sort to represent them. All of these are ideas of sympathetic magic where the subject of the magic is represented by something that is in sympathy with them, something that is similar to them, something that, shall we say, carries the same vibes. And this is very prevalent throughout magical practice. Um, it is a key idea in magical practice, and it's related to the famous maxim, as above, so below. As above, so below, as I understand that saying, is that everything in the physical world reflects its origin in the spiritual world, and everything in the physical world can be used as a key to access the spiritual world and also as a way to understand everything else in the spiritual world if you have a way to use that. And sympathetic magic is definitely part of that concept. When we use image magic, the most famous example of that is using a doll. Some people like to say puppet. I think that if you're an American English speaker, is a little pretentious. Although I suppose I'm probably not the best person to criticize that, but you generally won't find me using the term puppet. I will probably call it either an image or a doll. Hello to Fox Furwitch in the chat room. And there are a number of ways of doing that. One that I have written about on occasion is making a doll of your own higher self, representing, well, really your strengths and weaknesses, or perhaps simply your strengths, and using that as a key to work with your higher self. You could also make a doll of your shadow for the same purpose. You can make a doll for healing with a person. And if you have studied my degree lessons, in lesson 3, we talk about that at some length uh, and show that in video, in the video version, or use just a very simple representation of a human being and dedicate it as the person that you are seeking to heal. And you can send that healing in a number of different ways, or other things that you might wish to do. It can be yourself, it can be another person. Uh, Using pins is a very famous way. A lot of people think of that in terms of baneful magic, but that is by no means the only reason one might do that. The pin is a key to where you're sending the energy. And if you're sending healing to a person, let's say they've broken their leg, and you put the pin in the leg of the doll and focus the energy there. The idea is that the pin will guide it to where it needs to go. Another thing you can do with that kind of image is you can wrap it with yarn of various different colors for various different purposes. Um, while working your spell, the idea is that that will bring the qualities of the color of the yarn into the situation. Red for vitality, for example, green for healing, um, and so forth. And these are a couple of different things you can do with image magic. You can do protection work with image magic. One thing that people will sometimes do is they will use a photo of the person who needs to be protected, whether it's themselves or someone else, and place a mirror before the photo to reflect everything negative, and use this as part of their spell. Of course, that's not all there is to it. And if you want to know more about that, it's in the degree books and the other places that I have written. Um, because you have to charge everything and send the energy, of course. But um, that's a way of doing image magic. And of course, one of the most prominent ways of doing image magic is to have astral communication with someone. And particularly on our ancestor altars, we'll often have photos of the various ancestors. Um, and one of the purposes for that is to provide them a key to communicate through. And this is not necessary, but it is a lovely option and also helps to remember the person in a memorial sense. But historically, it was considered more important to that communication than it often is today. And if we look at the development of portraiture, it's very heavily connected to ancestor veneration. And we go all the way back to ancient Egypt. We see the use of statuary and paintings of the ancestors as a way of helping to communicate with them, and also a way of helping to make offerings to them. And in Egypt, the ancestral offerings were very, very important. Um, there was a belief that as long as they had offerings, the ancestor would have a good, happy afterlife and might cease to exist if the offering stopped. And I would say this has to do with that aspect of the soul and how long it remains remembered and relevant and active within the wider soul. So I actually think that is exactly how it works in part. Um, I think that each lifetime, even as the soul continues to reincarnate, each lifetime retains its essence as long as it is useful to the soul and as long as it's remembered by and involved in this world. So um, the soul, much as the Egyptians thought of the soul, has more than just one aspect to it. And several different aspects all running at one time. And this can become a very complex subject that we only have a few minutes left for, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But it has to do with ideas like the simultaneity of time. And that the soul can focus on a reincarnation at the same time that part of it is still focused on being an ancestor, and at the same time that another part may be having multiple parallel lives. And at least as far as this world is concerned, these things may all appear simultaneous. Whether they're simultaneous for the soul is another question. Um, my understandings of the soul is just that complex. Um, but how the soul exactly experiences time, or if it does, is certainly not the same as our experience. But working with the ancestors, the Egyptians, were very heavily involved in image magic. And one of the things you find in ancient Egypt is the idea of making offerings to the ancestors through images. And you'll find again and again and again um, memorial stelae showing the deceased ancestor receiving ancestor offerings, together with the little incantation for presenting them. And part of the idea was, as long as that image survived, they would have constant offerings and sustenance in the afterlife. The image was empowered for this purpose. One of the things that people are very much aware of is the ancient Egyptians um, putting tomb offerings in their tombs, often very extravagantly. And this is true, but one of the things people are not so aware of is they also would frequently take them back out after a certain period of time, because they believed that the images would carry forward the energy. And I believe they also had the point of view that once those tomb items had taken their shape in the afterlife, the physical ones were no longer as necessary. One of the things that has really kind of revolutionized how people look at Egyptian burial practices is the realization that they did reuse objects from one tomb to another. And that tells us that their view of how these things worked was a little more complex than what an earlier generation had thought. Now, Invisible Friend says, I agree. I think of it as active and latent aspects of our own infinite oversouls. Exactly. I incline to agree with that point of view. And hello to Gem Jupiter in the chat room. And Gem Jupiter says, hello, I'm new here. Blessings from Ohio. Welcome, Gem, and blessings to you. And at this point, we've come to the end of our broadcast. I apologize again. I was a few minutes late in beginning because I had intended to use a different platform today. But we've had a lovely program, and I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. And here we go. And why? Because we love our sponsors. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And we want to thank our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. We will have information for you on when that next auction will be shortly. And I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion of image magic. And I thank you for joining me, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to fully experience our connection to all that exists, and to find all of the connections that can help to power our understanding of life and our magic in life. Help us to enjoy and relish the complexity of existence, both now and as we go forward in our soul's journeys. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you again tomorrow.